Welcome to the Don Lemon Show, everyone. I am joined today by two good friends. One of them is an old colleague. You probably know who that is. That's Brian Stelter. He's a special correspondent for Vanity Fair and my former pal from CNN. And Dina Dahl is here. Hi, Dina, legal analyst for the Midas Touch Network. We love having both of you. Thank you so much. Pity we don't have much to talk about today. Sarcasm. So I would like to start by the latest thing that we have, because as you both know, you've been following this trial. Donald Trump comes out every day and he has a lot to say. Even he pretends he's not on the campaign trail, but he is on the campaign trail. Let's listen to him this morning right outside of the courtroom.
I think they're going to get away with this. If this country allows them to get away with this gag order and the way the case is being handled, like what they're doing yesterday was incredible. It was incredible. What they did, this trial was so horrible. It's no longer justice, and it's a tremendous abuse of the New York judicial system in particular. The New York judicial system has been absolutely abused and abused terribly, and it's the whole world is watching. It's very bad. So I'll now go and sit in that freezing cold courtroom for 8 or 9 hours and think about being on the campaign. But I'll be in the campaign on Saturday at 5 o'clock in Wildwood, New Jersey. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh. All right, so he's so put upon, right? He's probably one of the most privileged people in the country, but yet he is so put upon. Every day he takes chances, and his attorneys take chances by him speaking in front of cameras of defying that gag order, which he has, appealed the gag order. Dina, what is going on here? Why would his attorney even allow him to do this?
I don't think they can control him. He did have one social media post where he was talking about Stormy Daniels and took it down very soon after. I think a lawyer got to him and said, take that down. And if you notice, he doesn't have any specifics in that particular rant of his. So he's gotten the message. The judge made it very clear to him. If he violates it again, he's willing to put him in jail. But I still think that what he's doing in terms of disparaging our judicial system reminds me of what he did in 2016 with the media. I mean, he coined fake news that never really went away. And I'm really worried as an attorney about what the reputation he's doing to the justice system. And it's so even though it's a technical not violation of the gag order, I still think it really hurts him basically kind of lying about what's happening in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm. Brian?
Yeah, it absolutely has a corrosive effect in the same way that in 2017, when he started calling the real press the enemy of the people, he was almost presenting this kind of offer to his fans. He was saying, you don't have to believe the real news. You can believe me instead. Whatever you don't want to believe is fake. And I feel like, to your point, Dina, he's moved from doing that to the press to now doing that to the courts and the legal system. And the laws you don't like are fake, and the prosecutors you don't like are fake, and you don't have to actually believe it. However, that said, he's also behaved a little bit more carefully ever since Judge Merchan talked about jailing him. Am I wrong? I mean, he's been a little more careful. He's not posting crazy tweets.
I got something I'm going to show you in a second, but I just have to ask you, who is this? I think I know the answer to this. Who is this intended for, Brian? Is this intended for the MAGA folks? Is this intended for, the people who don't support him to make him seem strong that he comes out and he does this? And by the way, he's getting more media attention than if he was on the campaign trail, but I digress. Go ahead, Brian.
You're right that he is getting more attention through this courtroom campaign. That is true. I do think he's almost always speaking only to his base. And so, we should view his comments with that in mind. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to be a contrarian. I'm not defying the great Brian Stelter, but I want to play this as well from this morning. Here it is.
I'm trying to edit this very quickly in front of you, because if I mention the wrong word, they'll come out here and they'll take me out to a jail someplace, because that's the way it is with this judge. He wants to show how tough he is.
He wants to show how tough he is.
The reality is the judge has bent over backwards to be fair and generous to Donald Trump. You know what they did yesterday that I thought was a real disappointment? and a real loss for the public. Judge Merchan said, okay, no more photographers. We are not allowing photographers in to take a picture of Trump before the trial each day. All we were getting were these quick snapshots from a pool of photographers. At least we could see Trump's face and what color tie he was wearing. It was the bare minimum of access. But because, according to the judge, one photographer took a picture in the wrong corner of the room, no more photos. So the public view of the trial has been even more limited. And I would argue that's an example of the judge actually being very fair and respectful to Donald Trump, even though Trump's never going to admit it.
You think so? So, Dina, what he said, I guess that's not in defiance of the gag order, but he's still sticking it to the judge there by saying, oh, he has to show how tough he is. He's not breaking the rules there.
He's not breaking the rules because the gag order specifically doesn't restrict him from making comments about the prosecutor or the judge. But to be quite frank, I think that they should have been included because of how damaging Trump is. There is this idea, yes, you should be able to talk about a case in front of you if you think it's not fair. But he's so willing to lie and disparage them that maybe they should have also been included. And to your point about there being no photographers, I mean, I have talked about this from the beginning, so I'm just going to say it again. I think there should have been cameras in here. Yes, New York law is restrictive. Yes, they could have made an exception. Oh, that should be the exception you do to a former president.
Well,
Not give him leeway to violate a gag order, but let in the cameras.
But you don't think that they should stop him from being able to speak to the press in front of at the courthouse, right?
No, I don't think so. But
gotcha.
To be honest, I think the press should stop covering it as much. It reminds me of those steak commercials. Like, he's going to just lie about it. Why are we giving it so much airtime at this point?
Wow. Brian, to Dina's point, it feels like there is a big portion of the country. Well, I should say there's a portion of the country that's fascinated by this trial. And then there's another portion, perhaps a decently larger portion, I believe, that's just not following it at all. What is it? Is it just media bubbles? Is it polarization? Is it there are no cameras in the courtroom, or is something else at play here? Or is it?
I think it's I think it's exhaustion, fatigue, burnout. To me, Don, that's the biggest theme of this election season. There's always going to be political junkies, and I'll probably always be one of them. There's 10 or 20 million news junkies, political junkies in America, but everybody else is so fed up, so burnt out, and so many people feel politically homeless. And I would argue a lot of this is Donald Trump's fault, that he caused this exhaustion, that he caused this fatigue, even among some of his own fans. And I think that's underappreciated. Even some of his supporters don't want to hear that much about him or about politics anymore. Mm-hmm. So, we could argue whether that benefits Trump, whether that hurts Trump. But I do think that there's a fatigue around this trial, and we shouldn't ignore that. Like when I'm watching cable news all day, and it feels like this is the only thing happening in the world, I have to remind myself most people are not watching this.
Yeah, you got it. I have not. I dip in bits and pieces, and it's so interesting not being in that world anymore. And you realize, well, wow, when I was there, I thought every single person was paying attention, every single person was watching. And quite frankly, it's the opposite. But Brian, one more for you. Having said that, I asked this question to the audience yesterday. This is 2024, the year of our Lord 2024. And I wondered somehow, did we stumble back into, Back to the Future to 2016? Let me ask you why. Because in 2016, the trending topics were Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, Hillary Clinton, Access Hollywood tape. Do you know what the trending topics were yesterday? Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, Hillary Clinton, and the Access Hollywood tape. What is going on? Perhaps that's some of the fatigue that it feels like Groundhog's Day.
Because it is a repeat episode, because this is a rerun, because we have returned to the first season of the Trump show. Don, I've been popping up on our old network, CNN, a little bit, and I feel like they're booking me because I'm like a guest star from the first season that they're bringing back for season 8. It feels like one of those sitcom or drama tricks where you bring back a character from the old seasons. I mean, that is Stormy Daniels also. That is Hope Hicks, all these names that we heard in 2016, 2017, and 2018. It is, and again, some people like that sense of a repeat. I like watching reruns when it's a show that I really enjoy, but for the most part, I think repeats and recycled stories are pretty tiring.
Yeah, but there have been a lot of developments, Dina, because, and I'm glad that we can reflect on this on Friday, and then we'll have, the weekend to sort of catch our breaths. But it was a roller coaster of a week. You had Stormy Daniels' that salacious testimony. You had the big developments in both the classified documents case and his election interference case. Overall, was this a good or bad week, or very, very bad week for the former president?
In terms of the New York case, it was definitely a very bad week. And in two really important ways, I think the Stormy Daniels one. One is she was a very strong witness in this criminal case. I think that she made a really good argument for why they so badly wanted to catch and kill her story. Because the Access Hollywood tape, he talks about how he basically, as a powerful man, does whatever he wants sexually to a woman. And then she gives her story on the stand, which is actually that basically verbatim. It's not a love affair she's talking about. She's talking about being surprised that she's having this sexual encounter with him because of this power and age imbalance. It is the perfect example of what he talked about in Access Hollywood. So that particular story coming out after Access Hollywood would have been so bad. I think that's where we're going to hear the prosecution tie her testimony in closing. Will say, this is why her story was so important to Brian Barry because of that. And then in terms of the real-time election, it's kind of interesting because her detail, one, that she said that he first said that she reminded him of his daughter and then proceeded to have sex with her. And the really barely consensual nature of it. I mean, I covered Harvey Weinstein, and those stories were very similar. And this post-Me Too movement, people understand those types of stories as being maybe consensual, depending on the situation. And those are now coming out right before this election. And those details, even if people aren't tuned into the trial, people heard those details. And those will turn off a certain segment of voters that he needs this time around. So I think that's kind of the irony of this trial. It took so long, but that very story he so badly wanted to come out the first time around is finally coming out this time around. And I think it's going to hurt him.
Well, listen, Brian, I'm not sure if you met Stormy Daniels. I interviewed her. I found her to be very credible, very smart lady. And I've spoken to her on the phone several times, and she is, she's actually from my hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But here's the thing. I think people said, this is salacious. It's going to turn the jury off. I'm sure you've heard those comments. I actually think it's the opposite. I think that Stormy Daniels is I think she's very relatable to many people, especially women around the country, right? And I think she's probably very relatable to members of that jury because she came off as human. We're forgetting that Stormy Daniels is a human being. She even cried on the stand. She talked about her daughter. So I think that, I wasn't in the courtroom, but she probably came across, I would think, just reading the transcripts, as a very credible witness.
Especially because Trump's defense team spent even longer questioning her than the prosecution did. And that defense team tried to slut shame her and embarrass her. Yeah. And she stood up to all of it. Yeah. And she fought back to all of it in a incredible way. But yeah, she was so candid. She talked about her own insecurities, and that's why she felt like she had to sleep with Donald Trump. And it's almost as if we're litigating this in the public, in the post-Me Too environment. But we're talking about a pre-Me Too story. Right. So there's something very interesting happening in the public dialogue about this. And I'm more interested in the public court kind of version, what the public hears and what the jury hears. Because what the public's hearing about is manhood and womanhood. What kind of man is Donald Trump? What kind of man leaves his new wife and newborn and goes off to a golf tournament and tries to hook up with a porn star? And that story's been public in the past, but it's never been as widely broadcast as it is now, right, Don? Like it was in her book, it was in her interviews, but now this is kind of inescapable.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that this is about Dina knows better than either of us as an attorney. I mean, this is about money, and it's about paperwork, and which is quite boring. But then when you hear someone like Stormy Daniels talking about it, as you said, the manhood and womanhood, it brings a new aspect to this case that people actually find interesting. I want to move on and talk about kind of go back a little bit because we talked about all the aspects of this case, Dina, and I want to play something that was on Morning Joe yesterday, and it was Hilary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, talking about one of the developments in this case, or the possible developments in one of these cases. Let's play it.
The Supreme Court is doing our country a grave disservice in not deciding the case about immunity. I read the excellent decision by the Court of Appeals, and the judges there, I think, covered every possible argument. And what we heard when this case was tried before the Supreme Court, to my ear at least, were efforts to try to find loopholes, to try to create an opportunity for Trump to have attempted to overturn an election, to have carried out hundreds and hundreds of pages of very highly classified material for his own amusement, interest, trading, we don't know what. These are very serious charges against any American, but someone who's both been a president and wants to be a president again. That should cause any voter to think not twice, but many, many times over about whether we should entrust our country to him.
So two things, Dina. What she's saying, and I think what I'm hearing is she believes that the Supreme Court is slow rolling this. And the other thing that she said just before the soundbite that we cut there, she said, the sad thing is that the American people will probably go to the polls and vote without having knowledge of the outcome of all of these cases.
It is true that the Supreme Court probably could have taken the decision faster. It is also true that it is a very important case that it's complicated and they can't get it wrong, not only because of Trump, because it's going to apply to every other president. I think we got some takeaways from listening to it, which is that there's going to be some Article 2 core powers that the president will have immunity for. Private actions, even while they're president, they will not have immunity for. And there's going to be some in-between powers that the lower court judge will have to make a determination whether or not it is a type of an official act that can go forward. I think, got that from the oral arguments, which means that Jack Smith is going to have to decide what to do about his indictment. There are some private actions that involved in that January 6th DC case that he could possibly separate and try to have that case go forward without it. There's that civil lawsuit in the January 6th case where the Court of Appeals in that case already decided that that rally was a private action because it was funded by campaign money.
Yeah, but Dina, the point is, though, I think that these cases, if he actually does, let's just say people go to the polls and they don't have the outcome of these cases, they haven't ruled on, made a judgment on immunity, these two cases, the federal cases, could go away. He could, you understand what I'm saying? And they will never come back if he's president again. The other two may not be litigated until 2029 after he's president, because you cannot have a sitting president, according to, what was her name? Paula, versus Clinton. And so they said you can't have a sitting president who is under prosecution. So he may get away with all of this. That's the point I think that Hillary Clinton is trying to make.
And I think the way
Paula Jones is what it is, Jones versus Clinton.
I think the way he waited, we're going to get the Supreme Court decision end of June, very beginning of July. There is then a few months. The DC Judge Check-in is quick. I mean, she was moving that case along. You don't have a situation where you have Judge Cannon in Florida who will do everything possible to postpone a case. Mm-hmm. If a decision comes out that I think is going to give her some latitude in making a determination about the official acts, I think we will see some speed in her action. Mm-hmm. So I have a glimmer of hope that we will see something related to the January 6th one before the election. It might mean that Jack Smith takes some of the indictment, parses it out and and doesn't do all of them. But there are some private actions that he took in relation to January 6th, even if parsing out which officials can go forward or not. He could decide to just, that campaign rally was funded by campaign money. That speech on January 6th, when he says, let's go to the Capitol, that was funded by campaign money. That's a private action. Yeah. He could still move forward. I think that's our only hope, is the January 6th. The Florida one is done. That's not going to happen before the election.
And what Georgia's not going to happen before the election either, I don't believe.
The January 6th one?
I don't think the Georgia one is going to happen before the election because, now there's been an appeal by Trump's attorneys and on deciding whether Fani Willis will even be in charge of this case. Who knows how long that is going to take? And they may not want to do it close to the election because they don't want a Comey situation. This may be the only one that actually goes to trial in New York. I know you said that there are private actions, but this may be the only one that the public actually gets to see a lot of. But I want to move on because I want to go back to the future, Brian, again. This is going to be 2016. Michael Cohen is expected to take the stand on Monday for this trial. He is another voice and name, high-profile name from 2016. What do you expect? What are you anticipating? Is it going to be as scandalous, you think, as the Stormy Daniels testimony?
Well, no, I think Stormy Daniels was the emotional climax of the trial, especially because Karen McDougal is not going to be called to the stand. So emotionally, it's funny, Don, there were so many stories calling the testimony salacious and lurid and graphic and explicit. And I'm thinking to myself, since when did we get so prude in this country? What is with the puritanical streak in this country? It's Brian, just sex, people. It's boring. It's actually boring sex.
You remember Monica Lewinsky? I mean, I think that was more salacious than this when you were talking about the blue dress and people had to say president and semen and, you know what I'm saying?
At least there was a cigar involved. I mean, if you listen to Stormy Daniels' account of the sex, it was like the most boring sex of her life. And by the way, I think her testimony was very restrained compared to what's in her book, compared to what she's said in public. She has been so much more explicit about Trump in other settings, but I digress. That was the emotional climax. With Michael Cohen, it's obviously the most important witness for the prosecution to be able to try to tie everything together and to be able to say, we have showed you all these other witnesses that have corroborated what Cohen's about to say. But I do fear, Don, that next week is going to be the liar Olympics. Michael Cohen, proven liar, Donald Trump, a proven liar. Feels to me like it's going to get very messy very quickly in the cross-examination.
That's what I'm going to ask you, Dina, as an attorney. Does Michael Cohen, I think he's redeemed himself with the public. I think that he is telling the truth now, but there's going to be a credibility issue, and the attorneys are going to say, well, were you telling, what makes you, why shouldn't we think that you're lying now if you lied before for Donald Trump? You know what I'm saying?
Well, they will for sure say it, and that's why they didn't have him first, and pretty much every other witness will have said the same story when Michael Cohen goes to say it. And then it becomes less like he's lying, because then you have to believe every other witness who's come forward is also lying. And there is the fact that, he did go to jail for this. It was this exact incident he served time for. So yes, he could be a liar. And yes, he also could have done this thing. But the prosecution knows this. And that's why they have, I think, very meticulously laid out. I actually think they have probably over-proved their case by the end of this, because they have had so many witnesses overlapping, saying the same story, the same thing. So really, do they even need Michael Cohen? I think at this point, he's just like the icing, but he's saying the same thing that all the other witnesses really have said.
Can I tell you what I think has been so interesting about some of the so-called boring witnesses? Some of the ones that have been brought in just to read from copies of Trump's book. This is evidence that ordinarily would have been just entered into the public record, but Trump's team made it hard to do that. And so they had to compel some guy from C-SPAN to come and some publisher executive to come in. What's so interesting is when they're reading from Trump's own words, they're using Trump's words against him. Right. They are reading passages from his books about how meticulous he is and how much attention to detail he provides, and also how he treats people when they cross him and how he tries to attack people. But they're using his own words against him in that way through his own books. And I find that to be really striking.
Yeah, saying that if you're a good business person, then you know everything about your business, even down to the paperclip. So
yes,
the question
exactly.
is, how come you didn't know about this payment?
Right.
You must have known about this payment, payment, and writing a check for $130,000. Shouldn't you know where $130,000 is going? Were you guys surprised, Brian? Were you surprised that Rick Scott, Senator Rick Scott from Florida, was in the courtroom? Another Florida man. Trump's a Florida man. He's a Florida man. And to the extent the GOP is, that this has become a cult of personality, and that someone would associate themselves and put their political career, I would imagine, on the line, maybe now with the MAGA crowd, to get themselves involved and be shown at a case that involves hush money to an adult film star?
I'm only surprised that it took this long. I'm surprised that Trump didn't have fans with him during the first few days. I'm surprised he didn't bring the likes of Rick Scott to the courtroom on days 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. It's almost like belatedly the Trump team has realized, oh, maybe we should have a family member sit there. And so Eric Trump has been in the courtroom. Oh, we should have our friends come, like Rick Scott. Oh, Fox's Jeanine Pirro, she should come down to the courthouse and tell the Fox audience that Trump is being persecuted. It's like they're 3 weeks late to this strategy, but I think that relates, Don, to the lack of the crowds outside the courthouse. I mean, I've been down there on several different days, waiting to see MAGA supporters fill the square, and they never do. Trump claims that they're not allowed in. That's a lie. One day there were a couple of fans with a 15-foot high flag that said Trump or death. And here's what I know. If I know one thing about the media, if there were people with Biden or death flags, we would call them cult members. Like, that's a cult. And so I'm glad that you're not afraid of that word, because we have to call this what it is.
Yeah. And at the very least, it is cultish behavior.
It's cultish behavior. But the point is, there's not a crowd there. Rick Scott didn't show up for weeks. Jeanine Pirro didn't show up until this week.
Family members
I think that's striking.
Eric showed up.
Belatedly, they're trying to wrap Trump in an emotional support blanket, and that is kind of them to do, but they're kind of a couple weeks too late, I think.
Hey, Brian, I want to ask you about something. We have to talk about Kristi Noem, all right? Were you surprised by the extent to which Fox News and other conservative media groups really eagerly, I believe, well, at first they tried to give her cover. And,
right.
And some people are trying. I think Sean Hannity tried to give her cover at first, right? And then some of the folks on Fox News as well was like, well, I don't know the details or what have you. But she has been really thrown to the wolves this week. And I think she has thrown herself to the wolves and maybe to the dogs this week by going on these conservative outlets. And I guess she was expecting that they would protect her somehow. But I mean, is it strange to see someone like Kristi Noem, who was on the short list, all of a sudden now having to defend herself and really fight in the places where that's usually friendly to her?
Yeah, listen, Fox, Newsmax have been really hard on Kristi Noem. The interviews have been really tough and substantive. And that's exactly what these networks should be doing every day. Right. But they don't when it comes to Donald Trump. They don't when it comes to the people that they perceive the base to be really loyal to. So I think what this shows is the likes of Fox and Newsmax have their finger up in the air, checking which way the wind is blowing. And as soon as they realize that, like, oh yeah, everybody loves dogs and hates this Kristi Noem story, they go all in against Kristi Noem, and they give her a tough interview, not out of a journalistic necessity, which they should, but out of just sheer trying to stick with where the audience is. There was a great headline in CJR about this today saying Kristi Noem has proved that right-wing media actually can still turn on one of their own eventually. So it's true, and it's a notable data point, but I think what it speaks to is how relatively powerless Kristi Noem is, how little support she has. Mm-hmm. That's why she's been fed to the dogs.
Well, I don't think they had a choice, because the evidence against her that she was lying was so overwhelming. Dina, if you look at
the Kim Jong-un thing, it's crazy.
On the Kim Jong-un thing, and even the dog thing. She said, when I became aware of this, whatever, she had already read the audio portion of the book. That stuff was in there. If she had actually written the book, Dina, as an attorney, I mean, this would be a pretty easy case to prove against Kristi Noem.
Yes. Absolutely. You definitely don't have, I think she tried to blame it on her ghostwriter. Yeah, that does not fly. It's her name on the book cover. So anything she were to be written in there, yeah, she would be liable for defamation or, any falsities or anything like that, for sure. And I think Brian's right. It's because she doesn't have the power.
It's the audiobook thing that drives me crazy because I read all three of my books. I read the audiobook version, and all three times I found mistakes in my books. And thankfully they were like typos, like I would say January when I meant February, and I would fix those in real time in the audio booth book. And honestly, my audiobook was always the best version because it was the most up to date. It was the most accurate. It was the most perfect. So like the idea that she could sit there and record this audiobook and not catch these things blows my mind.
The audiobook goes from usually as close to the final version as possible, which means all of that stuff was in there. So
amazing.
I would say, I'll leave you with this corny pun, if you want to call it. The book stops with her. Okay?
And you know what? It's not even selling well. Like she's done this ritual humiliation. She's gone on all the TV shows. She's embarrassed herself in front of the nation, and she's not even selling that many copies.
She could be vice president, though. We'll see. I doubt it. We'll see. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
I'll see you guys.
Good to see you.
You as well. Thanks for watching The Don Lemon Show. Make sure you click on the image in the top right to subscribe to my channel and the thumbnail in the bottom right to watch more content from my show. And I'll see you next time.